The hammer falls in a hidden forge, a single chime of defiance. Celebrimbor, greatest of Elven smiths, works on a creation born not of order, but of a secret terror. He alone sees the light of the Undying Lands beginning to fade, and this artifact is his desperate answer. But in a realm of perfect peace, any act of defiance is a crack in the foundation of the world. This single act of forbidden craft risks everything he holds dear and threatens to unravel the eternal paradise of Valinor itself. By the end of this tale, you will understand the true cost of creation and the fragile line between ambition and ruin. Where does true darkness begin? Not in shadow, but in a single, well-intentioned act. And to all of you listening, I am genuinely curious. Where in the world are you right now? And what is the local time where you are? It is always a comfort to feel our shared curiosity spanning the globe. What would you be willing to risk to save something you believed was perfect? The stolen starlight coalesced in his hands, a raw power never meant for a forge. With every forbidden song he whispered, the crystal at its heart began to pulse, a rhythm alien to the serene music of Valinor. It was a cold, clear light, beautiful and terrifying in its independence. But creation always demands a price. As the crystal flared to life, the vibrant blossoms lining his secluded workshop trembled. Their gold and silver petals curled inward, their luminous hues draining away into a brittle, ashen gray. This was no natural decay. It was a draining, a withering that spoke of a fundamental theft. The life that sustained them had been diverted, siphoned into his desperate creation. This silent cry of the flora did not go unheard. Yavanna, the giver of fruits, felt the wound in her domain instantly. She did not come herself, but sent her most vigilant herald. The Maya Arian, she who guides the sun, appeared in the doorway. Her presence was not one of fire, but of absolute, unwavering judgment. The light in the small crystal seemed to shrink before her. You have taken what is not yours to shape. Celebrimbor, this artifact is a perversion. Surrender it, she commanded, her voice the sound of cosmic law. The standoff was absolute. On one side, divine order. On the other, a single elf's conviction that order was failing. In that breathless moment, Celebrimbor made his choice. His hand closed around the warm crystal, hiding it from her gaze. I cannot, he said, the words hanging in the now sterile air. This is not destruction. It is preservation. It is a memory for a day when there may be no other light. Rebellion, once a thought, was now a deed. As Arian departed, a silent promise of consequence in her wake, Celebrimbor knew he was truly alone. He summoned only one apprentice, an elf whose loyalty he trusted above all others. Swear to me, he whispered, his eyes burning with a frantic light. Swear you will speak of this to no one. The oath was given, binding them both in a secret that now felt heavier than any stone. His refusal did not go unmarked. In the highest towers of Tirion, the Vanyar, the elves most attuned to the light of the trees, paused in their songs. A subtle shift, a faint dimming at the edge of perception, like the first cloud on a perfect day. It was so slight most dismissed it as a trick of the eye, but a seed of unease was planted. The immortal light was no longer constant. It had wavered, and in that moment, the fate of the Undying Lands became inextricably tied to the secret burning in an elf's palm. Whispers became questions, and questions demanded answers. Soon, a summons echoed across the land, calling the wise and the powerful to a gathering at the Mahanaksar, the Ring of Doom, where the fate of worlds is decided. The Ring of Doom was silent, a circle of ancient power where even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Finrod Felagund, his golden hair a stark contrast to the grim faces around him, stood before the assembled Valar and the gathered elf lords. His voice, usually filled with song, was now a blade of pure reason. We cannot simply wait and have faith that the light will restore itself. Every day, it fades a little more. I do not counsel rashness, but inquiry. We must send forth a host to seek the source of this dimming, to find if some malady has befallen the outer lands. His plea was met with a profound, unsettling stillness from the thrones of the powers. Their answer was not anger, but a deep, paternal sorrow. Have we not provided an eternity of peace? They seem to ask. Is our care not sufficient? To seek answers in the dark is to invite the dark in. Patience is the only wisdom here. Trust in the music that shaped the world. But how can one be patient when the very air seems to be losing its substance? When the stars above look more distant each night? The council erupted into a tumult of whispered arguments. The elven hosts, once a single people under the light of the trees, were cleaving in two. A great many, their hearts fired by Finrod's courage and their own gnawing fear, rallied to his side. They would not sit idle while their world faded around them. They would seek the truth, no matter where it led. Amid the rising debate, Celebrimbor stood apart, a statue of silent torment. He clutched the secret in his hand, the cold crystal, a weight that anchored him to the spot. He knew the truth. He knew his own creation was the wound, the crack through which the light was seeping away. To speak would be to condemn himself and his desperate project. To stay silent was to watch his kin march into peril for a cause he himself had forged. The schism tore through him as surely as it did the crowd. With a final, sorrowful look at the impassive Valar, Finrod made his fateful choice. He would lead his people eastward, beyond the protective mountains, into the vast and unknown realms of Middle-earth. It was not a decision made in hatred, but in a profound, heartbreaking love for the light he saw dying. This was not a rebellion of anger, but of necessity. As Finrod's company gathered their supplies and their resolve, a palpable change fell over the land. The unity of Valinor, an idea as solid as the ground beneath their feet, had shattered. And as the host began its march into the high passes, a new mist gathered at their heels. It was a pale, clinging fog that smelled not of the sea, but of dust and forgotten places. It was a mist that had never been seen in the Undying Lands before, and deep beneath the grinding ice of the north, in the lightless pits of Utumno, a long dormant consciousness sensed the fracture in the world's harmony. A will that had been broken and scattered began, very slowly, to pull its thoughts together. The silence of Utumno was not an absence of sound, but a presence that consumed it. Finrod's scouts moved through corridors that had been empty for ages, yet the air grew thick and heavy. Their own footsteps made no echo. The light from their guiding lamps, once bright, seemed to shrink and falter, absorbed by a deepening gloom that clung to the ancient stone. This was no mere darkness. It was a gnawing void, a physical hunger that devoured both light and sound. One scout, venturing a step too far into a vast, lightless chamber, simply vanished. There was no cry, no struggle. His form and the light he carried were extinguished in an instant, his essence unmade. The threat was no longer a theory. It was tangible, and it was lethal. Panic threatened to unravel the company. Voices rose in sharp whispers, arguing for an immediate retreat back to the known world. But Finrod stood firm, his face pale but resolved. "We did not come this far to flee from a shadow," he told them. "To turn back now is to let this evil grow unchecked. Our duty is to understand it." His command was a desperate gamble. He ordered his followers to join their wills, to weave a protective circle from their own innate power. It was a taxing, draining act, a shield of pure light that pushed back against the oppressive void. For a moment it held, but the void was not a passive force. It pushed back. A pressure began to build against their barrier, a cold, sentient malice that tested its strength. Tiny flickers of their light began to peel away, dissolving into the nothingness. Their shield was not just being pressed, it was being slowly, deliberately eroded. The strain was immense. Finrod felt the energy leaching from his very spirit, a toll he knew they could not pay for long. Gasping against the crushing weight, his mind, sharpened by desperation, raced for another answer. He needed a power greater than their collective spirit, a light that no void could quench. His thoughts turned inevitably to the legends of his own house, to the 3 perfect jewels crafted by his uncle Feanor, the Silmarils. They held the last untainted light of the trees. Perhaps only such a light could pierce this consuming dark. A single rider raced west, the plea for the Silmaril, a fragile hope against the encroaching dark. But shadows have long ears. The message never reached the high paths where Arundel keeps his watch. It was intercepted, its words subtly poisoned. Where Finrod had written of a void that consumed light, the altered scroll now spoke of a power that rivaled the Valar themselves, a tool that Finrod sought to wield. This lie, crafted with cunning precision, was allowed to find its way to the Ring of Doom. The twisted words fell like a stone in the still waters of Valinor. Distrust, a foreign seed, took root. Could Finrod's quest for knowledge have curdled into a thirst for dominion? The plea for the Silmaril now sounded like a demand, a gambit for a power to challenge the very heavens. Yet high above the world, aboard his luminous vessel Vingalot, Arundel felt a tremor in the fabric of things. It was not the intercepted message that reached him, but the raw, desperate fear of his kin, a silent scream echoing up from the depths of Utumno. His duty was clear, to remain a silent star, a beacon of hope, but never a participant. Yet how could he watch from the sky, while his people were unmade in the dark below? His conscience became a battlefield. He made his choice. For the first time since his ascension, Arundel turned his ship from its celestial course. The star of hope descended, a slow, solemn fall from the heavens toward the sacred shores of Valinor. On the ground, the sight was not one of hope, but of terror. The mariner was coming down. His star, a constant in their sky, was falling. Panic spread like a wildfire. If the guardian of the last pure light was abandoning his post, what did that mean for the world? What catastrophe was already upon them? The descent did not go unnoticed by the highest power. Manwë, the Elder King, stirred on his throne upon Tanaquetil. He felt the shift in the great themes of the music of creation. This was a breach, an unscripted movement in the symphony of the world. A star did not simply decide to land. The order of things, painstakingly established after ages of turmoil, was being challenged. As the hull of Ingolot gently touched the sands of the Undying Lands, a world away, in the heart of the void, something stirred. The shadow in Utumno gave a single, slow pulse, a heartbeat of pure malice echoing the disruption in the west. It was not a flinch, it was a recognition. The chaos it sought to cultivate was already beginning to bloom. The corrupted messenger stood before the ring of doom, his eyes hollow. The words that fell from his lips were not his own, but a poison crafted in the deep places of the world. He spoke of Finrod not as a seeker of truth, but as a prince consumed by ambition, demanding the Silmaril to forge a crown of his own. The lie was perfect, for it preyed upon the Valar's deepest fear, that their children would repeat the catastrophic pride of Feanor. In the solemn silence that followed, trust curdled into condemnation. The decree was absolute. No aid would be sent. No Silmaril would be granted. Finrod and his followers were declared to be outside the grace of the Undying Lands, their quest now a heresy. Celebrimbor watched the judgment unfold, his own secret a burning brand in his chest. He knew the messenger's corruption was a direct echo of the void his own creation had helped to feed. His silence, meant to protect his work, had instead given the shadow a voice. The very malice he sought to guard against was using his inaction to strike its first, devastating blow. But one heart remained unswayed. Galadriel, whose wisdom ran as deep as the roots of the world, saw the flaw in the messenger's tale. The accusation did not align with the brother she knew. While the court of the Valar accepted the convenient lie, she made a choice that would echo through the ages. She would not abide by this decree. Gathering those who shared her doubts and her courage, she turned her back on the timeless light of home. Her decision was not a rejection of the Valar, but a deeper loyalty to truth. As Galadriel's ship, a vessel of silver and white wood, slipped its moorings and pointed east, the schism within the Elven people became an unbridgeable rift. Families were divided, lifelong friendships shattered by the choice to stay in fading safety or follow a disgraced hope into the unknown. And in the quiet hours of the night, the shadow seeped into this discord. It tainted the dreams of those who remained, twisting their rest into visions of betrayal and fear, ensuring that even in sleep, the people of Valinor would know no peace. The ship cut through seas that were no longer clear, but choked with a strange gray gloom, heading for a continent that seemed to swallow the very horizon. The hammer fell upon the crystal with a sound that was not a shatter, but a deep, resonant toll. Celebrimbor, his face a mask of furious regret, had brought his greatest tool down upon his greatest mistake. But the crystal did not break. Instead, it drank the force of the blow, its inner light flaring with a cold hunger. A searing pain shot up the smith's arm as he felt his own innate power, the very essence of his spirit, being drawn out of him. He tried to pull back, but his hand was locked to the hammer's haft. The crystal swelled before his eyes, growing from the size of a fist to that of a human heart, its light now a sickly, pulsating gray. He had not forged a vessel for light. He had forged a vessel for the void. As the artifact stabilized, its new power radiated outward in a silent, chilling wave. The vibrant, ever-present glow of Tyrion did not return. Instead, a permanent twilight settled over the city and its surrounding hills. It was not the gentle dusk of evening, but a thin, weak light, as if the sun were shining through a sheet of dirty glass. The gold and silver leaves of the trees now looked tarnished, and the songs of the birds were muted. This was the scar of his ambition, written across the sky for all to see. His apprentice stood in the doorway, having witnessed the entire horrifying transformation. The young elf's face, once filled with admiration, was now pale with betrayal. "You said it was for preservation," he whispered, his voice trembling. "But this is a blight. It feeds on us, it feeds on you." The truth of the accusation broke the last of Celebrimbor's pride. "Yes," he admitted, his shoulders slumping. "I sought to save the light, and instead I have become the source of the dimming. My fear has cursed the very land I sought to protect." There was only one path left, a path of utter humility. Leaving the pulsating crystal contained within a circle of cold iron, Celebrimbor climbed the long road to the halls of Unlight. He did not offer excuses or justifications. He fell to his knees before the smith god and confessed everything, from the first stolen spark of starlight to the moment the crystal turned against him. "Do with me as you will," he pleaded. "Unmake me if you must, but tell me how this wrong can be righted." All his gaze was not one of anger, but of a profound, cosmic sorrow. He looked not at Celebrimbor, but through him, as if seeing the fabric of reality itself. He reached out a hand, not to punish, but to gently touch the smith's forehead, sharing a fragment of his own divine understanding. In that moment, Celebrimbor saw it. The crystal was not merely a flawed creation. It was a seed of the Unlight, a force born from the absolute negation that existed before the music. "It does not cast shadow, all," said, his voice heavy. "It consumes creation. Every act of making, every thought of beauty, every spark of life only makes it stronger. It is a paradox that cannot be slain by any hammer. Its growth may be slowed, but it cannot be easily stopped." The weight of this truth was more crushing than any punishment. Yet within all his words was a sliver of purpose. "Come," the Valar commanded, turning toward the deepest of his mountain forges. "There are fires at the heart of the world, and there are secrets in the dark that even the void fears. We must seek an answer where light and shadow were first woven together." As they descended into the living rock, the faint, sickly twilight over Tirion seemed to deepen, a constant reminder of the fragile world they left behind. The protective circle of light flickered and died, its final spark devoured by the insatiable dark. Finrod's power was spent. With a roar that was not a sound, but a wave of pure negation, the void rushed in. Panic erupted. His host, once a disciplined company, shattered into scattered groups, fighting a desperate rearguard action through the twisting, lightless tunnels. They were not battling creatures, but the environment itself, a malice that turned solid rock into shifting traps and familiar paths into dead ends. In the chaos, Finrod was cut off, pushed down a side passage that sealed itself behind him with a grinding of stone. He was utterly alone. The darkness did not attack him physically. Instead, it offered him a dream. A vision bloomed in his mind, so vivid it felt more real than the cold stone at his back. He saw Valinor, but a Valinor perfected. The light of the trees was restored, brighter and more beautiful than ever, and he, Finrod, stood not as a petitioner, but as its king. The Valar were gone, their thrones empty, their judgment silenced. All the discord, all the fear, was washed away in a tide of perfect harmony under his sole, benevolent rule. It was everything his heart had ever secretly longed for, a world healed by his will alone. All you must do is cease your struggle, a voice whispered, not in his ears, but in the core of his being. Accept the peace I offer. But Finrod Felagund was a master of song and truth, and he recognized the false note in this perfect melody. This was not creation. It was a gilded cage, a beautiful lie that would make him a slave to the very nothingness he fought. With a cry that tore from his soul, he rejected the vision. No, I will not be your instrument. He did not have the strength for another shield, so he put all his remaining power into a single, desperate act. He became a weapon. Channeling the last dregs of his spirit, he unleashed a pure, concussive wave of light. It was not a gentle illumination, but a blast of defiant existence. The void recoiled, its form momentarily scorched and wounded by this sudden assertion of being. The tunnel wall before him exploded outward, not into another cavern, but into the open, frigid air of the northern wastes. The effort cost him everything. He collapsed onto the barren scree, his body drained, his spirit so faint it was barely a flicker. He was alive, but lost, exposed on a desolate plain, under a sky choked with unnatural cloud. Yet that single, brilliant flash of his defiance had not gone unnoticed. Far out on the gray sea, standing at the prow of her ship, Galadriel saw it. A pinprick of pure, white light against the dark land, flaring once and then vanishing. It was a signal, a cry for help written in a language only she would understand. She gripped the rail, her heart clenching with a mixture of dread and hope. She pointed toward the fading echo on the horizon. There, she commanded, make for that shore. The gray sands of the shore did not crunch under their feet, but swallowed their footsteps into a profound silence. Galadriel's company stepped onto a continent where the very essence of the world seemed to be draining away. Colors were bleached to shades of ash, and the air was thick, muffling their voices as if they spoke through heavy wool. This was the Unlight's true touch, a creeping void that consumed not just illumination, but life and sound itself. It was there, slumped against a pale, petrified tree, that they found Finrod. His noble form was gaunt, his spirit so diminished he seemed almost translucent, a memory of himself. Yet when his eyes met his sister's, the fire within them had not been extinguished, only banked to a desperate, glowing coal. The reunion was a quiet, sorrowful clasp of hands, a shared understanding of the catastrophe that words could not capture. The debate that followed was swift and grim. Some urged an immediate return to the ships, to flee this dying land and seek refuge across the sea. But Finrod, his voice a raw whisper, spoke of the consuming heart he had felt in the deep places. To retreat now would be to surrender all of Arda to this nothingness. In that moment, the last divide between their companies vanished. Galadriel and Finrod stood as one, their people uniting under a single, desperate purpose. They would not seek the void below, they would seek the power above. Their path was clear, a pilgrimage of pure, audacious hope. They would climb the slopes of Tanaquetil, the mountain of the Elder King, to stand before Manwë himself and plead for intervention. It was a belief that only a unified plea from the children of Iluvatar, from those who were suffering the consequences, could move the Valar to act. Their march inland became a trial of spirit. The Unlight, sensing their purpose, did not attack with claws and fangs. It attacked with phantoms woven from their own minds. A loyal guard would suddenly freeze, staring in horror at the shimmering form of a loved one he had left behind in Valinor, accusing him of abandonment. A proud smith would cry out, dropping his pack as he saw his greatest creations melt into slag before his eyes. These were not mere illusions, they were psychic wounds given form, each one a test designed to shatter their unity and erode their will. To continue, each elf had to confront their deepest regret and choose to walk past it, an act of immense spiritual courage. As the company began their arduous ascent up the sacred mountain paths, a change swept over the land sprawled below them. The pervasive twilight that had haunted Valinor deepened, coalescing into a solid, starless night. It was a darkness that felt ancient and hungry, a tide of negation rising to swallow the very home of the gods. The heart of the mountain was a crucible of pure creation. Here, in Alla's deepest forge, the air hummed with the primordial song of making. Celebrimbor stood beside the Vala, his hands working in concert with a divine will to build a cage for the abyss. Their creation was a vessel of impossible complexity, a lattice of woven mithril threads so fine they were nearly invisible, designed to hold a captive star at its core. But to power this cage, they needed a force that could oppose the Unlight, and the only source was the very energy Celebrimbor had recklessly channeled. Every time he reached within himself to draw upon that tainted power, it was like holding his own soul in a furnace. Agony, sharp and cleansing, seared through his spirit, a constant penance for his pride. Alla's voice was a low rumble, like stone grinding deep within the earth. This vessel will not destroy the void, it can only bind it, and the binding may demand a price that cannot be returned. It will require a constant sacrifice, a light that must forever burn to keep the darkness in check. Celebrimbor did not hesitate. His eyes, reflecting the forge's fierce glow, held a hard-won peace. "I accept," he said. "Let my life be the fuel, if it can mend what I have broken. This is not my masterpiece. It is my atonement." He poured every shred of his skill, his power, and his will into the swirling lattice. As the final, perfect gem was set into the structure's heart, the device flared with a stable, brilliant light. Yet with each pulse of its power, the world outside paid a toll. The twilight over Valinor deepened, the colors of the land leaching away into monochrome gray. They were not just fighting the Unlight, they were feeding the counter-device with the very substance of their world, a desperate race to complete the container before there was no light left to save. The moment the last gem clicked into place, a profound and absolute darkness fell over the mountain forges, as if the last candle in the universe had been snuffed out. The shimmering wall was not a thing of stone or steel, but of solidified light, a final boundary between the mortal and the divine. Galadriel and Finrod stood before it, their last hope dying in their chests. They called out, their voices full of desperation and reason, but the pleas struck the barrier and dissolved into silence, absorbed without a trace. They were shouting into a void of their own making, utterly cut off from the very powers they had come to beg for salvation. The company behind them began to fracture, their resolve crumbling into whispers of despair. They had journeyed to the foot of heaven, only to find the gates sealed. In that moment of absolute defeat, Galadriel did not reach for anger or force. She closed her eyes, and from her lips came not a shout, but a song. It was a melody of pure lament, a weaving of memory and love for the golden light of Lorelin, the silver dew of Tulperion, the sound of the sea on the shores of Alqualondeth. It held no demand, only a profound, aching grief for a beauty that was being lost. Her voice alone was not enough, but Finrod, recognizing the truth in her song, added his own harmony, a counterpoint of courage and sacrifice. Then, one by one, every elf in the company joined in, their voices blending into a single, heartbreaking chorus that was not a spell, but a confession of love for their dying world. This collective song, born from shared loss, did something their individual wills could not. It resonated with a deeper frequency, a faint echo of the original music that had sung the world into being. The impassable wall of light did not shatter. It flickered. For a single, breathless moment, it became less a barrier and more a veil, thin enough to be seen through. And on the other side, from the highest peak where he sat in judgment, Manwë perceived them. He did not hear a plea for power, but felt the raw, unvarnished truth of their hearts, the genuine love for creation that fueled their desperate journey. He saw the gravity of the threat, not as a report, but as a shared experience. His response was not the thunderous descent of the Valar. It was a single, purposeful motion. From the great eyries of Tanaquetil, one of the eagles of Manwë took flight, its mighty wings cutting through the oppressive air. It did not soar toward the beleaguered elves on the slope, but turned its course downward, speeding toward the deep forges of Alla, with a message that would change everything. The eagle's shadow fell across the forge entrance, and the great lord of the eagles, Thorondor, did not land, but hovered, his immense wings churning the thick air. His voice was not a sound, but a thought placed directly into their minds. The Elder King has heard the lament of the children. The vessel must be taken to the source, to the very heart of the void, in the deep places of Utumno. Only there, at the point of its greatest strength, can the binding be completed. The one who carries the light into that darkness will not return. They will become the anchor, a sacrifice to seal the emptiness away. A profound silence followed the eagle's departure. Then, Celebrimbor spoke, his voice quiet but unshakable. The duty is mine. It was my hand that forged the key to this lock. Let my hand turn it. This is not just my right. It is my only path to redemption. Alla, his face etched with a creator's grief, placed a hand of stone and warmth on the elf's shoulder. Your knowledge is a light we cannot afford to lose, child. Your skill could guide the rebuilding of ages. To send you is to extinguish a sun, to snuff out a candle. But Celebrimbor was already moving, his resolve a harder substance than any metal. My knowledge brought us to this brink. My sacrifice is the only currency that can buy our way back. He did not wait for further argument. With steady hands, he took the shimmering lattice from the anvil. He secured it against his chest with bands of leather and mithril, the device humming with a soft, persistent light against his heart. The fate of the Undying Lands was no longer a matter for armies or councils. It was a weight carried on the back of one fallible elf, a single spark, walking willingly into the mouth of the abyss. He left the forges without ceremony, a lone figure disappearing into the gloom, his path set for the darkened lands of the east. The world outside the mountain was a corpse of itself. Celebrimbor walked through forests where the trees stood as brittle, gray stone, their leaves turned to dust that hung motionless in the dead air. He did not follow a path, for the land actively resisted his journey. A solid ridge of rock would dissolve into a treacherous bog as he stepped onto it, while a canyon would snap shut behind him, forcing him ever forward. The Unlight knew its enemy was approaching, and it marshaled the very earth against him. His knowledge of craft and structure became his only compass. He could sense the points of unnatural stress in the landscape, the places where the void had weakened reality's weave. He avoided these, moving with a smith's intuition for the integrity of things, navigating not by sight, but by a feel for what was truly solid. Phantoms dogged his every step. They wore the faces of his long-dead kin, of Fëanor himself, their voices a chorus of seductive reason. "Why die for a world that has already condemned you?" they whispered. "We could build anew, you and I." A vision unfolded before him, not of darkness, but of a new kind of creation. He saw forges fueled by the Unlight, crafting artifacts of unimaginable power. Empires raised not from stone, but from the silent fabric of the void. It was a future where his genius would be unchallenged, his name sung for ages, not as a fool, but as the greatest of all makers. The temptation was a physical ache, a promise to erase all his failures. He clutched the lattice against his chest, feeling it steady, demanding warmth. It was not a comforting heat, but the burn of a debt coming due. He answered the phantoms not with arguments, but with a single, repeated truth. "I choose the light I marred over the power you offer. I choose the flawed beauty of the world." Each refusal was a battle won within his own soul, and with every victory, the spectral voices grew fainter, their hold on his mind weakening. Yet the cost was written on the world around him. With each step he took toward the void's heart, the land paid the price. The thin air grew so starved of substance that he moved as if through water, and the gray landscape began to flake away at the edges, dissolving into a formless, colorless haze. Then he saw it. The entrance to Utumno was not a cave or a gate. It was a wound in the fabric of the world, a vortex of absolute nothingness that swirled in silence at the center of a vast, crumbling plain. It did not beckon or threaten. It simply was a perfect absence that pulled at him, not with force, but with a terrifying, gravitational inevitability. It called to the tiny spark of the void that still lived within the artifact he carried, and it called to the shadow of pride that had once lived in his own heart. He stood at the edge of the abyss, a single, fading note of existence, against an endless, waiting silence. The silence was not an absence of sound, but a presence that devoured it. Celebrimbor crossed the threshold into the heart of Utumno, a cavern so vast its ceiling was lost in a swirling vortex of non-being. This was not a place of darkness, for darkness is merely the absence of light. This was the Unlight itself, a conscious, churning nexus of absolute negation. The device against his chest erupted in a searing white blaze, its light not illuminating the cavern, but fighting a desperate, visible war against the consuming void. The light pushed back the nothingness for a few precious feet around him, a tiny island of existence in an infinite sea. Then the voice came. It did not speak in words, but in concepts that bloomed directly in his mind, cold and perfectly reasonable. "You call this peace, but you know it as stagnation. Valinor is a perfect, unchanging song on an endless loop. It is a museum, not a living world. Its beauty is a lie that prohibits growth. Your own rebellion proves this. You, who dared to create something new, were the first crack in its flawless facade. Its end is not a tragedy, but a necessary cleansing, a blank page upon which a truer, stronger creation can be written. And you, Celebrimbor, could be its architect. The logic was a poison that resonated with his deepest frustrations. He had felt the constraints of that perfect peace. He had chafed against the unmoving glory of the Valar. There was a terrible, undeniable truth in the void's critique. He stood there, a lone figure bathed in his own defiant light, and he acknowledged it. "You are not wrong," he whispered, his voice a tiny spark in the immense quiet. "The piece was a cage, but you offer only a different prison. True creation cannot be born from destruction. It is born from love, from memory, from the stubborn will to mend what is broken. You offer nothing but an end to choice, to struggle, to the very song that gives life its meaning. I choose the flawed, living world over your perfect, silent nothing." His declaration was not a shout, but a final, absolute refusal. The reaction was instantaneous. The compelling logic vanished, replaced by a wave of pure, undiluted rage. The swirling nexus of nothingness convulsed, pulling inward, coalescing. It did not form a monster of claws and teeth, but something far more terrifying, a perfect, humanoid shape of absolute blackness, a hole in reality that advanced on him with a single purpose: to unmake the annoying spark of his existence. As the form lunged, its silent passage causing the very stone at its feet to dissolve into mist, Celebrimbor's hands, guided by a calm that surpassed all fear, found the activation runes on the device. His fingers pressed down, not in panic, but in perfect, final precision. The word was not a spell, but his own name, given back to the universe as a final offering. As Celebrimbor shouted it, the lattice on his chest did not explode. It unfolded. The light that erupted was not a weapon, but a memory. It was the scent of Laurelin's golden dew on a spring morning, the sound of a hammer shaping a perfect curve of metal, the warmth of a shared song among kin, the profound, aching love for a world worth saving. This was a light the void could not comprehend, for it was woven from the very substance it sought to erase. The brilliance did not attack the advancing form of nothingness. It enveloped it, wrapping the churning nexus in threads of solidified memory and sacrifice. The void fought, convulsing in a terrible, silent rage, but it could not break a cage made from concepts it had no power over: love, regret, and hope. As the light tightened, the form collapsed inward, compressing into a stable, silent crystal that pulsed with a soft, internal rhythm, a perfect prison of light, holding a heart of absolute dark. The cost was absolute. Celebrimbor felt the threads of his own spirit, his Fea pulled taut. He was not being killed, he was being unmade, his very essence becoming the final, binding knot in the lattice's weave. He saw his hands begin to fade, not into mist, but into pure, golden light. There was no pain, only a profound and final exhaustion, and beneath it, a peace deeper than any he had known in the Undying Lands. He did not fight it. He opened his arms, a final, accepting embrace. His last thought was not of loss, but of the smith's ultimate truth, that the most important creation is often the one that demands the creator become part of the work. The shockwave that erupted from the cavern was not one of force, but of restoration. It washed over the gray lands of the north, and the petrified forests groaned as life rushed back into their branches, leaves exploding into vibrant green and gold. It swept across the sea, and in Valinor, the clinging twilight shattered like glass. The true light of the trees, no longer thin and sickly, flooded the land with its full, glorious radiance, so sudden and pure, it brought every elf to their knees in wonder and tears. In the now silent heart of Utumno, the war was over. The cavern was empty save for a single, perfect crystal resting on the stone floor. It glowed with a gentle, steady light, a quiet testament to the price of peace, a star forever burning in the deepest dark. The first dawn after the silence was a baptism of pure, untainted light. It poured over the hills of Valinor, brilliant and whole, yet it revealed a land forever scarred. The legendary forests of Lorien stood leafless, their silver branches skeletal against the sky. The rivers, once swift with liquid starlight, now moved with a weary, sluggish current, as if remembering the weight of the twilight. The elves themselves walked with a new gravity in their steps, their immortal faces marked not by age, but by a shared, profound sorrow. Survival had been purchased, but the cost was etched into the very soil and soul of their home. The work of healing began not with grand spells, but with patient, heartbreaking labor. The Valar, their own power diminished by the struggle, walked among the elves, not as distant gods, but as fellow gardeners tending a wounded earth. They taught how to coax life back into the petrified roots, how to sing the waters clean again. This was not a swift restoration, but a mending that would span ages, a testament to the depth of the wound. In this new, sobered world, the Valar appointed Galadriel and Finrod as the chief stewards of the restoration. Their wisdom, forged in the desperate fires of the outside world and tempered by loss, was exactly what the healing land required. They did not command from towers, but worked in the fields, their hands in the earth, guiding their people not with decrees, but by example. They understood that the land needed to mourn, and they gave their people the space to grieve for the perfect peace that was lost and for the smith who had given everything to win back its shadow. The peace they guarded now was different. It was not the effortless, taken for granted peace of before, but a fragile, hard-won thing, cherished precisely because everyone now knew its price. It was a peace forever marked by the memory of the twilight and the silence of a single, empty forge. And in the deep halls of Alla, the great smiths turned their hammers to a new kind of work. They were not crafting artifacts of power, but monuments of memory, shaping living stone into forms that would forever tell the story of the scar and the sacrifice. The great forge hammers of all fell in a new rhythm, not of desperate creation, but of solemn purpose. In the center of Tirion, where the light was now clean and whole again, the Vala and the surviving Elvin smiths worked together. Their task was not to hide the past, but to enshrine it. From a fallen star, they forged a plinth of pale, luminous metal, its surface inscribed not with names or victories, but with the simple, geometric patterns of unity and balance. Upon this pedestal, they placed the contained crystal. No longer a secret horror, it was now the Heart of Remembrance, pulsing with a soft, eternal light that held both the warmth of sacrifice and the chill of the void it contained. A quiet argument unfolded around this new monument. Some of the Eldar, their hearts still raw from the loss, argued that the crystal was a relic of shame. Why place our greatest failure in the very heart of our city? They whispered. Should we not bury this mistake and try to forget? But others, led by the tempered wisdom of Galadriel and Finrod, saw a deeper truth. To hide it would be to repeat the error of secrecy that began the calamity. This is not a monument to failure, Finrod declared, his voice carrying across the gathered elves. It is a lesson in humility. It reminds us that even the most perfect light can cast a shadow, and that the greatest power requires the greatest responsibility. The Valar, in their newfound unity with the children, agreed. The Heart of Remembrance would remain visible to all, a permanent, quiet beacon. Its gentle glow would serve as a daily reminder of the cost of peace and the fragility of paradise. It transformed their understanding of safety. The world was no longer a place where evil was simply kept beyond the mountains. It was a reality that could be born from within, from the best of intentions, twisted by fear. This acceptance did not weaken them, it grounded them. It marked the true beginning of a new era for Valinor, one where the pursuit of knowledge and craft would forever be tempered by a profound and sobering respect for its inherent dangers. As the final consecration song rose around the star-metal plinth, a collective breath was held. Then, a single, tender shoot of green unfurled from the seemingly dead roots of the white tree of Tirion. It was a small thing, a fragile bud, but it was the first new growth since the twilight had fallen. The silent, hopeful gesture of the world itself seemed to bless their difficult choice, a sign that from remembrance, even from a heart holding darkness, new life could indeed begin again. The new growth on the white tree was a promise, but it could not erase the map of scars now written across the land. A profound and difficult wisdom had settled in the hearts of the elves, a recognition that the Undying Lands, though healed, were now one sanctuary among many in a vast and vulnerable world. The light they had nearly lost was a treasure they could no longer hoard. In a quiet, sun-drenched square of Tirion, Galadriel stood before her people, her voice clear and steady. The world beyond these shores is wounded and dark, she declared. It is filled with mortals who live and die beneath the shadow we have only just escaped. Our duty cannot end at our own borders. We must become guardians, not just of this peace, but of all peace. This was the birth of the scattering, a voluntary exile born not from pride, but from profound responsibility. It was a decision that tore at the very fabric of their society. Families were divided once more, but this time, the parting was not fueled by whispers of rebellion, but by the sober acceptance of a necessary division of labor. The sadness was a tangible presence, a quiet grief for the unbroken years they would never again share. Yet, woven through that sorrow was a thread of resolute purpose. They were not fleeing a fading land, but carrying its renewed light into the shadows. The most poignant of these partings was between brother and sister. Finrod, his spirit still bearing the invisible wounds of his ordeal in the north, chose to remain. My strength is needed here, to mend the roots and the spirit of our home, he told Galadriel, his hand resting on her shoulder. Your strength has always reached farther. You will be our eyes and hands in the lands of sun and dust. It was a painful but perfect understanding, a separation accepted for the good of both worlds. The Valar, in a gesture that marked this new age of trust, did not forbid the exodus. Instead, they blessed the endeavor. They provided ships of silver wood and pearl white sails, vessels built not for flight, but for a solemn, purposeful journey. As these ships were launched from the shores of Alqualanda, the same shores that had once witnessed kinslaying and rage, the scene was one of heartbreaking beauty. There were no shouted curses, only soft songs of farewell and hope. The sails caught the renewed light of the trees, glowing like captured moons on the water. The ships of the departing glided into the west, their silver sails a final, gleaming testament to a people who had learned that true guardianship sometimes requires leaving paradise behind to protect it from afar. In the silent, timeless halls where history is not recorded but woven, Vera the Weaver began a new work. Her loom, which for ages had depicted only the unbroken glory of Ammon, now clicked and shifted with a different rhythm. Into this new section of the tapestries of time, she wove threads of stark gray and brilliant gold, of deep sorrow and defiant hope. Here was Celebrimbor's secret forge, the withering of the blossoms, the desperate stand in the void, and the final, luminous sacrifice. Nothing was omitted. The tapestry forced any who looked upon it to confront the full, uncomfortable truth that their paradise had been saved not by flawless virtue, but through failure, regret, and a terrible, necessary price. This was not a comfortable history. It was a mirror. In its threads, the proud saw their own potential for ambition, the fearful saw the cost of silence, and the grieving saw their loss given a sacred meaning. Moved by this unflinching depiction, Manwa issued a decree that would echo through the ages. This new tapestry would become the first lesson for every soul, elf or maya, who entered the Undying Lands. Before they knew the songs of triumph, they would understand the scars. They would learn that their peace was not a default state, but a choice actively maintained, a balance forever threatened by the shadows cast from within. This act made the legacy of the Twilight foundational to Valinor's very identity. It was a vaccination against forgetfulness, ensuring that the past could never be polished into a harmless myth. The peace they now enjoyed would forever be understood as a fragile, hard-won thing, making its guardians more vigilant, its citizens more humble. As Vera wove the final thread, a scene of a silver ship vanishing into the eastern horizon, a new and subtle music began to rise from the land itself. It was not the grand, unchanging theme of the old song, but a more complex melody, woven through with notes of sorrow and resilience, of memory and hope. It was the sound of a world that had faced its own darkness and had chosen, with clear eyes, to keep singing. The only sound in Celebrimbor's forge was the soft sigh of settling dust. Allah moved through the stillness, his divine hands performing the final, mundane tasks. He carefully coiled a length of wire, hung a hammer on its proper peg, and with a gentle breath, extinguished the last, faint ember glowing in the great hearth. A final wisp of smoke curled upward, carrying the ghost of fire and ambition into the silent air. He did not cleanse the space or strip it bare. He left every scorch mark on the anvil, every stray metal filing on the stone floor. This was not a shrine to be worshipped, but a classroom of consequence, a place where any who sought to create could come and feel the weight of a dream that tipped into catastrophe. The Vala felt a hollow ache, a loss that was profoundly personal. He had not just lost a student, he had witnessed a sun of potential vanish from the sky, its light and all the wonders it might have wrought extinguished forever. From a fold in his simple smith's apron, he drew a single rough piece of mithril. It was unworked, pure, and shimmered with a soft inner light. He placed it with deliberate care upon the anvil's scarred surface. It was not an offering, but a question. It was potential itself, waiting. It acknowledged that the drive to make, to shape, to improve was not the error. The error was in forgetting the cost. In this quiet act of closure, I let go of his own grief for what might have been. He turned his back on the silent workshop, his purpose reforged into something more resilient and infinitely more careful. The deep peace of the abandoned forge was absolute, a sealed capsule of memory, but just beyond its stone threshold, the vibrant, determined sounds of a world rebuilding itself carried on, a chorus of hammers and songs, weaving a new future from the threads of the old. The first notes rose from the silver harps of the Teleri, hesitant at first, then gaining a sure and steady rhythm. This was not the old music of endless, untroubled bliss. It was a slower, more complex melody, woven with the sigh of the wind through leafless branches and the soft chime of the Heart of Remembrance. It was a song of resilience, of finding light not in spite of the scars, but within their very texture. It spoke of the beauty in a mended bowl, more precious for the golden seams of its repair, and the deeper peace that comes only after a storm has passed. The new lay spread from singer to singer, from shore to forest, with a speed that surprised even its creators. Its melancholy harmony did not bring sadness, but a profound sense of recognition. For the first time since the light returned, someone was singing the truth of what they had all lived through. It gave a voice to their collective grief and their hard-won strength, becoming the unofficial anthem of this new, sober age. Yet not all ears were receptive. Among the Vanyar, those who had dedicated themselves to the pure, unblemished light of the old days, the song was met with resistance. To them, its minor keys felt like a stain on perfection, a mournful acceptance of a fallen state. They argued for the old hymns, for music that looked only upward, refusing to acknowledge the shadow that had touched them all. But the will of the majority had matured. The people had lived through too much to pretend anymore. They embraced the new song because it honored their entire journey, not just the golden beginning. It was an honest expression of their newfound maturity, a cultural declaration that they would no longer hide from their own history. This shift was more than a change in musical taste. It was the final, cultural acceptance of Valinor's transformed nature. The trauma was no longer a hidden wound, but a thread integrated into the very fabric of their identity, making it stronger and more authentic. As the last verse faded in the city squares, the sea breeze carried the haunting melody down to the pearl-white shores, where it mingled with the endless sighing of the waves, a lament and a lullaby for a world reborn. The Silmaril on his brow no longer blazed with untested glory, but shone with the steadier, more profound light of a vow kept. Arundel turned his back on the sacred shores, his steps heavy with a new and permanent burden, the guilt of his hesitation. He had remained a silent star when his kin were unmade in the dark, and that moment of inaction would now be etched into his eternal watch. As he guided Vingalot back to its celestial course, he made a silent promise to the world spread out below him. He would never again dismiss a cry for help, no matter how distorted the message might seem. His vigil was forever changed. He now watched the outer dark for ancient threats, but he also watched the inner light of Valinor, guarding against the fragility that he now knew could bloom even in paradise. For the elves of Middle-earth, the morning star that now pierced their pre-dawn skies carried a deeper message. It was no longer a distant, perfect promise, but a hope that had been tempered in the fires of sacrifice, a light that understood the cost of its own existence. From his lonely post high above the spinning world, his gaze fell upon the tiny, glimmering lights of Galadriel's ships, a string of pearls upon the dark sea, carrying a renewed purpose into the waiting shadows of the east. Yavanna walked, and where her feet fell, the earth did not merely heal, it sang. Life erupted in her wake, not as a simple restoration of what was lost, but as a defiant, vibrant explosion. Flowers bloomed in colors that had no name in the old songs, their petals shimmering with a tough, resilient light. Trees sprouted with bark like polished steel, and leaves that chimed softly in the wind, species born from the crucible of survival, possessing a strength the old, untested forests never knew. This was not the return of a perfect, static garden. It was the greening of a world that had earned its resilience. The new growth held a wild, unpredictable heart. Vines might climb a silver wall with an almost conscious intent, and a grove of singing saplings could decide, overnight, to shift their harmonious chorus into a complex, dissonant melody. This was the chaos of life that had faced the void and incorporated its memory, a beautiful, untamable force that refused to be entirely orderly. At first, the elven gardeners were perplexed. Their old methods of gentle guidance felt insufficient. They could not command these new creations to grow in perfect, geometric patterns. They had to learn a new form of stewardship, one of partnership rather than dominion. They provided water and song, but then stepped back to watch, to listen, and to learn from the land's own will. It was a humbling and profound education in letting go of control, a lesson in trusting the wildness they had once sought to perfect. This new, dynamic balance between the Valar, the Elves, and the essence of Arda itself signaled a deeper harmony. It was a living pact, a shared commitment to a world that was allowed to be itself, flaws and all, because its imperfections were now part of its strength. And from the heart of every new, unnamed blossom, a fragrance rose on the air, a scent of rain on fresh, turned earth and distant, clean oceans, a promise that renewal was not a single event, but a continuous, breathing process. Deep in the gardens of Lorien, where fountains sang of forgotten stars, Urmo at last turned his attention inward. His domain, the realm of visions and sleep, had been the most insidiously wounded. While the land was mended and the light restored, the Unlight had left its poison in the very wellsprings of thought, twisting the private sanctuary of dreams into a landscape of fear. His work was a great cleansing, a gentle but absolute tide of pure creativity, washing through the collective unconscious of the elves, scouring away the last clinging residues of the void. For the first time, in what felt like an age, their dreams were truly their own again. Yet for many, the memory of those corrupted visions was a cage. They would fight against sleep, their bodies weary but their spirits terrified of what they might find in the dark behind their own eyelids. The act of rest, once a simple pleasure, had become a battleground. Urmo did not command them to sleep. Instead, he came to them, to the smith who dreamed his forge fire turned to ice. Urmo brought the gentle warmth of a summer smithy and the scent of clean, hot metal. To the mother who saw her child lost in a gray mist, he wove a dream of a sun-drenched meadow where the child's laughter rang clear and true. These were not escapes from reality, but landscapes of gentle healing carefully crafted visions designed to rebuild the strength that fear had eroded. This spiritual cleansing was the final, crucial suture for a people whose external world was whole, but whose inner world was still bleeding. You can rebuild a tree, but how do you rebuild the feeling of safety under its branches? You can restore a river's light, but how do you restore the peace it once brought to a troubled mind? Urmo's work answered that. He mended the invisible architecture of the spirit, the foundation upon which all other peace is built. As the elves began to trust the night once more, a profound and quiet change settled over the cities and forests. The frantic energy of survival softened into a steadier rhythm. Laughter returned, not as a brief spark, but as a sustained melody woven into the fabric of their days. The collective heart of Valinor, so long clenched in a fist of anxiety, finally learned to beat in a calm and trusting rhythm. A quiet music that promised the long work of healing was at last taking root from the inside out. The first council of the New Age gathered not in a ring of stone, but in a simple meadow dotted with white clover. The shift felt jarring. The Valar sat upon the grass, their divine forms seeming almost too large for the humble space, while the elven lords and ladies, accustomed to looking up to thrones, found themselves meeting their gazes directly. An ancient rhythm of command and deference, practiced for millennia, faltered in the quiet air. For a long moment, no one spoke, the silence itself a testament to the profound awkwardness of setting aside old habits. How do you begin a conversation when the very structure of your society has been upended? The answer came not from a speech, but from a shared breath. Manwë himself was the first to speak, his voice not a proclamation from a peak, but a quiet tone in a circle of peers. "We are here to listen," he began, "not to judge. The future is a path we must walk together, not a road we have already paved." This was the core of their agreement. They would no longer issue decrees from on high. Their role was now to be guides and guardians, sharing the burden of stewardship with the children of Iluvatar. The discussion that followed was halting at first, a clumsy dance of old formalities and new intentions. A Maya of Allah, used to receiving perfect obedience, presented a plan for reshaping a damaged valley. An elven artisan, her hands still stained with earth from the day's labors, gently suggested a different approach, one that worked with the land's new, wild spirit, rather than forcing it into an old mold. The Maya paused, not in anger, but in genuine consideration. The conversation that blossomed from that pause was the true beginning of their new age. It was a dialogue, a true exchange where the wisdom of the ages met the wisdom of recent, hard-won experience. This structural change, this commitment to meeting in rotating, humble clearings, ensured that the lesson of the Twilight would never be forgotten. It embedded the memory of failure and sacrifice into the very heart of their governance. There would be no more distant rulers in shining cities, no more unquestioned authority. The peace of Valinor would now be a collaborative work, constantly tended by many hands, making it far more resilient than any imposed perfection could ever be. As their first gathering drew to a close, the true twilight descended, soft and natural, painting the sky in hues of violet and rose. And there, as if blessing their fragile new beginning, the evening star, Eärendil, kindled in the deepening blue. It was a familiar light, but it now shone upon a world learning to govern its own heart. The being of nothingness did not lunge, it simply was, its presence erasing the space between them. Celebrimbor's hands met the warm lattice on his chest, not in a defensive gesture, but in an act of ultimate acceptance. He did not look at the advancing void, but inward, at the memory of Laurelyn's light warming his face, the scent of the forge, the sound of his people's first, faltering song of renewal. He poured every one of these moments into the device, offering them as the final, crucial component. The word he spoke was his own name, not a shout of defiance, but a quiet surrender, a signature on a contract written in his own soul. His essence did not fight the unlight, it enveloped it. A silent conflagration erupted, a battle waged not with fire and force, but with existence itself. The brilliant light of his spirit, woven from memory and love, became an inescapable net around the churning negation. He was the anvil and the hammer, the fuel and the flame, holding the line with a will that was no longer his own, but had become one with the act of sealing. He felt the last shred of the unlight drawn into the crystal, its hungry silence finally contained, and as the prison snapped shut, there was nothing left of him to hold. His form dissolved, not into death, but into completion, the final motes of his being flowing into the lattice to become the ultimate, unbreakable seal. The victory was absolute, the void was bound, but the silence that remained was the silence of a single, missing note in the great music, a perfect piece bought with the price of a self, utterly and forever erased. Valinor endures, but its light now holds the memory of shadow. The peace that blankets the land is not the untroubled calm of a world that never knew fear, but the deep, profound quiet of a home reclaimed after a long and harrowing journey. It is a peace that has been earned, and so it is cherished all the more. The sacrifice of Celebrimbor is not sung in grand ballads of heroism, for there is no glory in the tale. Instead, it is woven into the great tapestry as a permanent, sobering lesson, a quiet story of how the noblest of intentions can lead to the brink of ruin, and how redemption can sometimes demand everything. The elves who walk these shimmering shores now carry themselves with a quieter grace. Their joy is no less real, but it is a joy that has been tempered by loss and refined by wisdom. They find beauty not only in the unblemished petal, but in the resilient green shoot that pushes through cracked stone. Meanwhile, the silver ships of the departed have long since vanished into the east, carrying with them a spark of this hard-won hope into the wider, waiting world. They are the living legacy of the scattering, guardians not of a perfect paradise, but of the fragile idea that light must be shared to be truly saved. And in the heart of Tyrion, the Heart of Remembrance glows with its soft, eternal rhythm. It is not a beacon of triumph, but a quiet sentinel, a promise etched in light and memory. It ensures that the lessons of the last days are never polished smooth by time, never forgotten. For in the end, the twilight did not lead to an endless night, but to a dawn whose beauty is measured by the shadows it overcame.